Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. I recently watched the legendary, notorious film Cruising as part of a gay movie marathon. And in the review, I did want to talk about some of the more controversial elements of the film, including several murders that were apparently inspired by the film. But I didn't really have the time in the review. I thought I'd do a separate video. Now, the film was sort of notorious for being based on a gay serial killer and focusing on the sort of gay subcultures of the leather and S&M scenes, and they filmed in real leather bars and real S&M bars with real extras who were real people who went to the bars and stuff. And it got a lot of negative attention at the time. Straight people had problems with it, homophobes had problems with it. The gay community had problems with it because they felt that it would sort of focus on a subculture that would then be used to represent them and persecute them. So they had a problem with it. The censors had a problem with it. They cut about 40 minutes out of it, which allegedly added to the film being a little bit difficult to ascertain exactly what happens at the end and who the killer is. And about a year after the film was released, there was a murder. And the murder was in Sydney, and it was a guy who apparently he had befriended some American sailors who were docked in a ship in Sydney, and they watched Cruising on the ship the night before the murders. Now, the guy was stabbed 60 times, and they believed it was inspired by Cruising, and it was one of the American sailors. Now, whether it was a gay sailor and it was a gay murder, thrill kill, or whether it was a hate crime, they never solved the case. So that's the first murder that's attributed to the film. And the second one was later in the 90s. There was a man, Barry, who basically had leukemia, and he would go on walks at night. He didn't come home one night. The next day he was found lying on the ground outside of a public toilet in a public park in Brunswick, and his pants were around his ankles, but his underwear was up. And the idea was that he'd been killed while he was trying to cruise. It was either homophobic killing, or he tried to cruise someone, or what later got put down as a gay thrill kill, because a man whom I sort of know had a relationship with his partner had told a story that he had killed this man. It was a case of he was meeting up with his friend who was an ex, and they often would tell big stories and fantasize about various kinky things, and usually try and outdo each other with stories of their conquests and so forth. And that's allegedly what happened that day, and the ex was disturbed by this and eventually went to the police, and they wired him up and tried to get a confession out of Jamie. And eventually they failed at that, but they got another guy involved who supposedly wanted to meet up with him to sort of do some stuff. And they met up, they had a talk, and he was sort of maneuvered into telling that story again. And then that was used as a confession to charge him and convict him with the murder of Barry. Now, he says that he was just telling a big story, that he had a reputation for telling big stories and being a bullshit artist. He was a creative person, he was a dancer and an artist and a performer. And he swears that he was just making up this story from what he'd heard from the news stories to try and impress or outdo his ex. But somehow, legally it's supposed to be, beyond a shadow of a doubt, basically, that you would convict someone. They're supposed to be, but yet they just believe the story. Now, the story had a lot of inconsistencies. He said he drove there, but then he said he walked home and he was on foot. He didn't have a car, so he couldn't have driven there. The outfit the guy was wearing changed. He said that he made the guy give him head before he killed him, and he blew in his mouth. The man had no semen in his mouth. The knife, he said, they used was a decorative sort of ceremonial for display sort of Egyptian knife, but yet it was way wider than the wound, so it had to have been a more regular knife that was used. And he said it was raining when it wasn't, or he said it wasn't raining and it was raining. There were so many inconsistencies with his story, and the only things that he sort of got right were things that were known, to the public from the story being on the news. So the idea that he just made up this story to outdo his friend seems quite possible. And it seems fairly shocking that he was convicted on this story as a confession when there was no evidence, and a lot of the elements of the story didn't match the circumstances of the case anyway. So there was a fairly big movement in the gay community to get justice for Jamie. There's even a book which was written by Fritz Matten, who I met, and it didn't save him. He ended up going to jail. He went to jail for, I think, like 15 years. I'm not sure. I know he got out in 2013, and he got, I think, is it parole? That's where, because he could have gotten earlier parole, but in order to get parole, you have to admit that you actually did the crime you were convicted for, and he wouldn't do that. He always maintained his innocence, but he eventually got parole, so he must have eventually admitted to doing it. But whether he did that just to get out, I don't know. I was there at the time, but I wasn't exactly on the inside with that thing. So yeah, it's interesting. There is another person who was suspected by one police officer of committing the crime. He had been accused of stabbing another man to death at a public toilet in a park, very, very similar. And he actually went to jail for tying a 17-year-old boy to a chair in his home and stabbing him to death. So this guy could possibly have been a gay serial killer. And he was released from jail 2 days before Barry was killed. And the park where the other guy had been killed was only 3 miles away from the park where Barry was killed. So it seems quite possible that this other person did it. But the police had one gay man dead, one gay man in jail, and apparently that was good enough for them. Allegedly, some police stated this, pretty much. And I know someone who, heard that personally, who told me about that. So it's a very controversial case. A lot of people, in the law sort of were shocked that the case went through and he was convicted based on the story. And, when you look at the other suspect, who I don't think they really even looked at, they had someone, they'd confessed, that's all they needed, basically, is the way it looks. Jamie was a model prisoner. He ended up teaching sex education, and he used to make toys. He taught prisoners how to make toys for his kids. This is one of the bears that he made that I ended up with. Unfortunately, it's not Cow Bear, because sometimes he had limited resources, and he'd put noisemakers in the toys so they'd make noise when you sort of move them, and they were usually like bear growls and stuff like that. But somehow he ended up with a cow one, and it moved, and he put it in a bear. So you'd lean this bear forward and put him back, and he'd move. And I called him Cow Bear. I wanted him. I didn't get him, though. I got this one. But, I don't know what to think of it. I mean, part of me thought it does seem ridiculous, and other parts have thought, well, what if he did do it and he just exaggerated the story to make it more impressive? That would explain why nothing was quite, as it was. Like, it was a rainy night, he used a fancy knife, stuff like that. He could have just exaggerated the story, and actually did it. But it seems more likely that he just made up a story to impress this ex that apparently was prone to telling big stories and having big fantasies and so forth, which I think he all denied, because this is all, it's in the book, and it's in the court transcripts and everything, and it's interesting. I've wanted to do a video about this for a while, but I would not want to do an injustice to Jamie, and I'd have to do some more research and at least read the book again. And that's going to take some time. So I probably will do a proper scripted video about it at some point, because it's interesting. But for now, I just want to do this little video just talking about it for a minute, because watching the film reminded me of it, and doing the review made me want to talk about it, but I knew it'd be like a 15-minute review, and they really are two different subjects, so I thought I would just do a separate video. It was supposed to be 5 minutes, but it's basically rounded up to 10 now. So I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the film, of the killings. Is the film to blame? That was a whole nother issue that came up in regards to the film and the controversies. And in the case of Jamie Coleman and his conviction, do you think that was fair? Do you know anything about it? Do you remember it at the time? There was a fairly big movement to try and save him at the time on the gay scene. And yeah, I'm going to go. Bye.